Is it okay if I read something?
Oh, please.
I think this is a passage that I also read in our last conversation with Tim, but I think it captures, like I say, who the hell really knows what Bohr had in mind? But here's the penultimate paragraph, or excuse me, the next to last paragraph of Bohr's famous response to the EPR, the Einstein-Podolsky-Rosen paper, which is one of the few places where he's thought to have tried to take some care to spell himself out explicitly. Bohr says, this necessity, the one I was just referring to, this necessity in each experimental, this necessity of discriminating in each experimental arrangement between those parts of the physical system which are considered which are to be treated as measuring instruments, and those which constitute the objects under investigation, may indeed be said to form a principal distinction between classical and quantum mechanical descriptions of physical phenomena. It's true that the place within each measuring procedure where this discrimination is made is in both cases largely a matter of convenience, while, however, in classical physics, the distinction between object and measuring agencies does not entail any difference in the character of the description of the phenomena concerned. This is what I was saying a minute ago. Its fundamental importance in quantum theory, as we have seen, has its root in the indispensable use of classical concepts. I'll say something about this in a minute, in the interpretation of all proper measurements, even though the classical theories do not suffice in accounting for the new types of regularities with which we are concerned in atomic physics. In accordance with this situation, there can be no question of any unambiguous interpretation of the symbols of quantum mechanics other than that embodied in the well-known rules which allow to predict the results to be obtained by a given experimental arrangement described in a totally classical way, and which have found their general expression. That part is not important. By securing its proper correspondence with the okay, actually, that's as much as is going to be relevant to our conversation here. Bohr thinks, whereas in classical mechanics, there's no need to make such a discrimination. In quantum mechanics, there absolutely is. And so the very idea of a total description of the world in terms of our fundamental physical theory makes no sense, okay? Simply makes no sense. Let me say a little bit about this classical language. Here's what Bohr, I think, thought was going on. Bohr had some idea, and this kind of has an almost tragic structure to it, okay? Bohr thought that the following two things were true. One, the use of the language of classical physics for describing things like pointer positions or outcomes of experiments was ineluctable, was unavoidable, okay? Was inescapable. Okay, that's the language we use, and that's the language we must use, okay, in order to record the outcomes of experiments, in order to communicate the outcomes of experiments, in order to reason about the outcomes of experiments. Why he thought this was unavoidable, why he thought it wasn't possible to learn the quantum mechanical language and start using that, I have to say I just don't have a clue. Okay, but he was very sure of this, and this was very important to him. And this gives rise, like I said, to a kind of deep philosophical, tragic tension, okay, which is the following. These classical concepts are utterly indispensable for the purpose of recording and reasoning about and communicating about the outcomes of these experiments. And on the other hand, they are absolutely inapplicable as you know, they are incapable of being put to work in order to describe the behaviors of these subatomic particles that we're doing measurements on. Okay, so the thought was, in order to reason about, record, communicate about the results of these experiments, we must speak as if the material body must always be here or here, okay, and not in any superposition of the two. But insisting on that will make it impossible for that language to describe the behaviors of these systems that we're doing experiments on, okay? So there is this tension buried in the very concept of the scientific project itself, which is for the first time showing its face with the advent of quantum mechanics. And this is not something to be gotten over, or to, you know, this is, you know, in Heideggerian language, not to be bypassed, okay?
It makes sense why this is called the foundations of physics.
Right. You can't get past this, and this has the consequence that in order to do science at all, there must be a part of the world, our measuring instruments, ourselves, that we're talking about in non-quantum mechanical language, okay? So you have this tragic, necessary incompleteness of the fundamental language of physics, okay? This is very obscure. This is, just as a historical matter, Bohr's, through his education, was very much influenced by Hegelian language, was very much influenced by Kierkegaardian kinds of language, and so on. And I think, now I'm just purely speculating, but I think historians ought to look into this.